Boom! According to that, I am live. This is Hiko Simon. It is 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time, Sunday night, as it is every week. And welcome to Tokyo Tonight. Very good to see you all. It's got 9 people viewing so far. Very good to see the J Vlog, Odie Jr., Mr. Cordy Chap, Quint Ranked, and Steve from Berkeley. Good to see you all. Yes, long show last week. Not so many topics this week, and actually I've got an early start tomorrow, so I am really going to try tonight. As I say every week, I'm going to try to keep it short, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Barry Convex, good to see you, and everybody else. Hope that you're all doing well. Remember, as always, if you want to get my attention with a comment or ask me a question or request a topic or something like that, just do what Brianna W just did with the WhatsApp. Just say my name with correct spelling, and it will highlight like that, and it will stand out to me. Very good to see. Nice hand signals there, Odie Jr. Very good indeed. Dong. Hang loose. Good to see you all. Hope you're having a good week. It's been a funny old weekend. Not really any big news. A lot of coronavirus related stuff as usual, as I suppose is the case everywhere else. Of course, we had the state of emergency extended until the end of May. So, you know, basically it could, the way things look at the moment, given that things aren't really changing here, we could be going all the way up to the Olympics in a state of emergency, which would be kind of crazy, but yeah, it looks like they've pretty much decided, as we will go into tonight, that it's going to happen regardless of the situation. Andrea Moboy, good to see you. Yes, indeed. As you know, I always try to do that. So, yes, indeed. No gang signs, says Steve from Berkeley. Hey, we're kind of a gang, like the sort of gang that you used to see on cartoons, like when I was a kid. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of I was a big fan of Fat Albert, although obviously Bill Cosby's career has sort of taken some turns that make that sort of complicated now. Wow, getting frantic with the Crips signals there, Odie Jr. Yeah, what? Keep the language civil. Went out of focus there for a moment. Not a lot going on. I was just sharing earlier that over the last couple of weeks I'd watched a bit of Netflix, so I sort of summarized those up. About a week ago I finished watching Travelers. It wasn't actually very promoted. I hadn't really noticed it. It finished a while ago, so maybe you already don't know about it. But it's sort of a time traveling. It's a lot like Quantum Leap, except it's with a group of people. But it's a similar concept to that. If you remember that show from the late 80s, early 90s, I think it was actually in the 90s. But it was pretty well done on Netflix. I recommend it. It's a weekly show, and they've got to build drama and excitement. So, you know, it was always sort of on the verge of becoming kind of cliched. Becoming, yeah, a little bit corny at times, but it didn't fall into it, and probably partly because it got cancelled after 3 seasons. It was forced to come to a pretty satisfying, I would say, conclusion. Satisfying in the sense that it was non-conventional. It wasn't predictable. That's what I liked about it. It didn't, it wasn't like Lost, which had 2 or 3 seasons that you felt like they were just filling in for the ending. So that was pretty good. Also shared last night, I watched Stowaway. Not good. If you know science fiction, if you know the short story, The Cold Equations, it's basically that. It's the idea of what happens if you're on a rocket that, everyone's life is dependent upon the equation of the weight versus fuel and whatever, and you have a stowaway or an unintentional passenger that puts all lives on the thing at risk. Yeah. The story it's based on is a very cool classic science fiction short story. The movie itself, was a bit meh. After that, I started watching The Circle, the American version of The Circle. I've been getting stupider, like non-stop. I've just been watching that and feeling my brain cells just disappear, although it was fun. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it in the same way I wouldn't recommend like cocaine or meth to anybody. But yes, it certainly has a kick. Not that I know anything about the other things, but yes, it's brain pollution, but it was fun. I've been enjoying watching that. But anyway, if you've got recommendations, definitely share those things. The Olympics, it'll happen, says Andrea Moboy. Yeah, I think we're pretty much the plane is locked on. We are no changing direction now, as silly as it seems, but that is what it is. So yes, I will try not to get too distracted by the comments. I see, good to see Erin, and thank you once again every week, Erin, for the shorts that you've been editing. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for moderating as well. Although, like I say, thanks everybody for making it a relatively easy crowd to moderate, I think. Not that much, huh? Made it almost, you came made it in perfect time, because I've just pretty much finished with the introductions and I'm about to dive into it. So, yeah, excellent timing there, not that much. So yeah, let's do that. Hi indeed. The J-Vlog, the docudrama Age of Samurai is pretty interesting. Yeah, I saw that as well, and I talked about that a few weeks ago. I enjoyed it, and to tell you the truth, like a lot of things in Japan, the whole Sengoku Jidai and the whole, it's sort of like you hear over and over the names of the samurai who, the unified Japan, Nobunaga, Ienaga, and the other guy, the three or whatever. And and seeing that Netflix thing, it was kind of an entertaining, compelling way to see the story of that, and it didn't look like a conventional sort of dressed up, tiger drama from NHK. That's it. After watching it, I did actually. There are some channels that do nothing but talk about the whole Sengoku Jidai in detail. And when I started reading some of the critiques of that series, there were some pretty harsh, like the way that they focused, the way that they ignored the entire campaign to unify Kyushu, which is like where all the people lived, and they just focused on some fairly inconsequential, daimyo up in Tohoku that really didn't like count for very much or mean very much for the series. I mean, granted, it was a series, they had to pick the story, that they were going to tell and what they were not going to say. But yeah, that said, I really did enjoy it. So, yeah. Wow, Andrea watched Stiesel, really good and interesting. I think I saw that. I wasn't really thinking that looked very interesting to watch, but since you recommended it, I will check that out. Kareem Nishkori, you are not late. You are perfectly on time, because we're about to jump in. Sergeant, I see Bilko. Sergeant Bilko, yes, good to see you. And Stiesel was good, as the actors had to learn Yiddish, as we all speak in their native Israeli or Hebrew. Oh, I see. So they were Israelis who had to learn Yiddish for it. Yeah, well, fair enough. It was well done and well acted. So it was subtitled, was it? I suppose. I mean, I could see how that could kind of be interesting. I mean, a comedy drama about the Orthodox Jews. Well, if it was done by Mel Brooks, I would be drawn to it. But yes. Anyway, like I said, I think I can get through it quickly tonight, because I don't have many stories. But I say that almost every week, except for last week when I said I had a lot of stories, and it went like an hour 20. So let's dive into it now, and straight into it. Why do Japanese programmers get paid so little? I talked about this a bit, actually. I gave a bit of a thread on the notion. In fact, it wasn't directly off this tweet. It was actually a related topic about Japanese government IT disasters, and people suggesting, is it because the Japanese IT engineers are underpaid? And I gave my take on why Japanese government and public sector IT is such a mess. But yeah, as something which I've both been an engineer and someone who works as legal in IT companies over a long period of time. I mean, so this is from Unseen Japan, which, by the way, I find a lot of good content on here. I see there's content on here which seems to annoy a lot of people that I respect and follow on Twitter, but I really like their YouTube channel. They have great documentary videos. And yeah, I mean, you don't have to like everything that they post, but this is a good topic, and the basic summary, you should read through it. I mean, the fact that this person was someone in Hokkaido, a programmer who was getting a salary of 100,000 yen a month, I assume that means after taxes and whatnot. And look, I was getting pretty well paid as a new graduate when I graduated, and I was doing programming back in 1999, and wages haven't changed that much. And I was taking after tax less than 150,000, and that was pretty, and it worked out with bonuses to 5 million a year. That was like my starting salary in Japan, which was good as a new graduate salary. That was better than average. But I remember I was like living out in the sticks relatively from Tokyo. I was living in Kashiwa in a 60,000 yen a month apartment, and based on the just paying my rent and my food and my utilities and everything, I really only had about, I mean, if you take food out, I basically had almost nothing. I had about $200 or $300 a month. So getting without living at home. Although if you're in Hokkaido, I guess you could live cheaper. I mean that example is pretty awful, but I suppose it could exist. But yes, but look, some of the things, how Huawei is stealing Japan's tech talent, and it's not just Huawei, by the way. A lot of the Chinese and Korean companies have been poaching engineering talent from Japan, and frankly, paying them less than they would get paid um, uh, in their actual own companies, but still paying more than Japanese companies. So it's true that they underpay. Seniority over talent. Yes, that is still definitely a thing. The lifetime employment system is basically that you're on a travelator from when you join, and that you get paid based on less on performance. Lately, they are factoring performance in more, and they are for things like AI and cloud certifications. They are paying entry level salaries much higher than they traditionally paid. In fact, I think at NTT Data they were advertising for AI jobs that were paying $6-figure salaries, like more than 10 million yen a year, from new graduate thing, which is ridiculous because even experienced, you can be 10 years working in a place like NTT Data and you would not be earning 10 million yen. So offering it to new grads would be pretty outrageous, I think, to the middle managers and so on that get paid less than that. But that's the level of demand for those skills that are scarce in Japan. So not entirely, but certainly if you're working in a big company like Hitachi or NEC, that's definitely the case. Hey, Elde Long, if you were there, thank you for subscribing. By the way, everybody, remember, like and subscribe. Do appreciate it. So yes, the seniority thing is there, and the fact that it's very entrenched in some of the big IT companies is definitely a thought. I mean, that's mainly what it sort of is talking about. I would certainly the lack of flexibility and the just overall the way that IT in Japan is just structured into being dominated through these big companies. It's different. It's different to places like America or Australia, where you might typically go and get your IT certifications and then go and look for a job in a company in the in-house IT team. In Japan, it's more common for large companies to outsource all of their IT entirely to these big IT conglomerates, the big four being NTT Data, but generally the NTT entities, Fujitsu, Hitachi, NEC being the big four. And there's also, IBM is very big in Japan. There's a couple of other, there's actually a number of other big companies. But because those companies basically control all the IT, typically what happens is you go and pay a big outside company to go and build your system, and they built it from scratch, totally custom. And then the company would hire the project manager from that big four company, who would parachute in and become the head of IT internally in that company, and they would basically just make sure that all IT work gets outsourced to the company that designed the original work. And because their position is entirely based on the fact that they know better than anyone else inside the company the systems that they run, it means that they have a vested interest in never updating and improving the systems and sending lots of easy money and contracts back to their old company. So yeah, it means that there's been a lot of resistance to updating and upgrading IT, and particularly now that a lot of these system updates that people are living on now are 20, 30 years. It means that this is why so much of Japan runs on outdated IT. And within that, because it's basically structured around entrenched, embedded, getting increasingly elderly and close to retirement age engineers protecting their positions, it's very top-down controlled, and it's very difficult for young, talented engineers to really, demand pay and have an influence and make suggestions, which presents a huge opportunity for companies that are making a business on disrupting that. And there are lots of IT companies out there that do that. But again, the market rates for paying IT engineers are set so low by the large companies, it means that you can compete for those jobs without needing to pay very much. And also as a profession, honestly, IT engineers are treated like garbage in Japan. In most countries, you treat IT engineers like they're experts, so you ask for expert advice. In Japan, they're really treated like cleaning people or whatever. They're treated like people when a system goes down. It's like, oh, you must have screwed up, hurry up and fix it. And again, this is because it's entirely outsourced, so it's treated as a service that is provided to the companies that's supposed to just always work without the people in the companies understanding it. Which means that basically the customer as God mentality gets applied to IT, where they're forced to do a lot of unpaid overtime, they're forced to do a lot of work for free. It's terrible economics. And again, this is another thing that I think with things like cloud, and new technologies such as AI engineering and so on is definitely changing the market. It's creating opportunities for people with scarce IT knowledge that's now in high demand from a lot of companies to come in and demand higher pay and better conditions, and to not have to bend over backwards. This is another problem as well with IT traditionally, is that people came in and just did whatever the customers asked for, even if it was a bad thing, even though even if they should have given those customers advice that no, you can do it better and smarter this way, and they never did it. And a lot of bad IT in Japan is just based on those compromises that were made 20 years ago that I was on projects that did. Now there's a real opportunity to change all of that, but yeah, this is a fundamental point. The good news, I suppose, for Japan is that in spite of the low pay, there's a lot of people who are drawn to it, who are drawn to programming, and a lot of good programmers realize really fast that if they go and spin out and make their own small company, that they can get contracted and earn more money working on contract for big IT companies. But yeah, it's hard to attract international talent, and it's hard to stop good Japanese talent getting taken by overseas companies when it's true they're just not treated the same or given the same respect. So it's it's a topic I could go into in a lot of depth, actually. I really think it's a good time right now to be a programmer. I'd encourage my son to go and get IT certified right now, but in the really valuable certifications, and not to go work in the companies that abuse their workers. Because I know what that's like. But yeah, it's an interesting time and an interesting topic. So that is the first topic. Why are Japanese IT programmers and engineers generally so underpaid in Japan? Into the topics. The comments, I meant to say. I saw there were some names there. Oh, some new names and some things with my name highlighted. So just quickly catching up. Boom, 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 boom. Got a hi there. We've got down here, Tokyo 503, good to see you. Subtitles, yes, Andrew, my boy, thanks for pointing that out. Kengan Kodos, good to see you. And yeah, late, but said the average age for a 40-year-old in Japan is 250,000 yen per month, which is, yes, US dollars, about 2,000 yen, $2,000 per month. Pretty sad. It's a third world country, to be honest. Just more smoke and mirrors. Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, the pay will vary. Average pay will vary based on where you live. It'll be better in Tokyo, and it'll be cheaper in places like Kyushu and Hokkaido, just because the cost of living is less. The other thing that's fundamentally different about pay structure in Japan is that because it's a hangover from the 80s and 90s, when everything in the government was structured to force companies to make people save money and keep money in the bank, because those bank savings resources were used as collateral for infrastructure development and public works and so on from the government. So because of that, most companies pay people on a structure where, rather than, yes, you will get 250,000 yen per month, but good companies will pay up to 4 months worth of pay as bonuses, i.e. you'll get that $250,000 16 times a year. Every 6 months, you'll get a 2-month value, like 500,000 yen bonus. Although, some companies pay 1.5, some pay 2, some pay just 3 months all at once, and lately it's been a trend that with deflation and so on, and with the economy being in trouble, it's those bonuses that are getting cut. But certainly what I found really challenging when I first came to Japan, living month to month, the bonuses were great, and they did force you to save, and they allowed you to make big purchases. Based on your bonus, you could go buy a car all of a sudden. Like, it does the saving for you, so I appreciated that, but it was like I was definitely in a situation where, my savings at bonus time would slowly go down, and I'd be back to almost nothing by the time I got my next bonus. So yeah, it's true that people do not get very much. I would say per year, I think that the average for a 40-year-old would probably be about 7 or 8 million. But that's based on, as you point out, the divided by 16 rather than divided by 12. So yeah, have to do the math on that. Entity. Yeah, there are a lot of entities, by the way, but entity data is the one that I think you see nowadays mostly in IT. Dan H, good to see you, Dan H. We've also got, I believe I saw a name in here somewhere. Was it my imagination? I thought I saw a name that did not look familiar that I wanted to say hello to, but I might have skipped over it. Say hello anyway. Please do say hello if you are in the comments, and particularly if I haven't shouted you out yet. I thought I saw a name like Slake or something, but maybe I was just scanning too fast and getting confused. Anyway, I am going to go to the next story. And these are not organized tonight. So this is an Olympic story next. Um, so former kind of multiple times failed Tokyo gubernatorial candidate Kenji, and his name is escaping me at the moment that I start to look at this, but basically a former gubernatorial candidate has posted on change.org a petition on cancel the Tokyo Olympics to protect lives, on the idea that basically it seems inevitable that with the Utsunomiya Kenji, that's right, lawyer, Communist Party candidate, but actually he's done quite well, and he's quite a well-known labor rights lawyer and advocate. He has gathered 308,400 signatures online. I have signed up to this myself. Just the fact that it is inevitable to me that it will, hosting the Olympics in the middle of what's clearly still a critical and out of control stage of the pandemic, where the population is definitely not vaccinated, and not just in Tokyo, in rural areas as well. The government insists that it's going to happen no matter what, and that they're going to make it work by isolating athletes. They're not going to allow them to go and mix with the public. They're going to not have spectators, most likely. So they're going to be minimizing interactions and whatnot. It is still unavoidable that there are going to be athletes that are going to bring it in. There are going to be athletes that are going to have it here and require hospitalization here. And there are going to be athletes that are just going to have normal Olympics type injuries and are going to need hospital treatment. And the government's promised that they're going to give priority hospital treatment to athletes, be it for heat stroke or, broken arms or COVID-19, over regular patients. And we have a situation I'm going to go into in more detail right now in Osaka, where hospital beds are at maximum capacity, and there are situations like elderly people's homes and homes for disabled people where there have been clusters, and they have not been able to put any of the people in critical conditions into hospitals. There have been no beds available, and those people have just died. I mean, basically it's a situation like Delhi right now in Osaka, that the medical system there is overwhelmed with cases. So the idea that you've got a really fragile system in Tokyo that is currently managing, but is still at risk, and you're going to have tens of thousands of athletes come in and staff for an international event. The notion that that is not going to cost at least one life is unthinkable. And if it costs one life, then it's not worth it. This is the thing for me, and the government is kind of blindly and arrogantly proceeding on the assumption that, oh no, they've got it under control. They'll make sure it won't, it won't affect. But whether it does directly, whether people catch it and die from catching it from visitors associated with the Olympics, or whether people catch it and die from participating as volunteers, or the sort of interaction that will happen associated with the Olympics, or whether it happens because someone can't get into a hospital because athletes were given priority to overstacked hospitals, or doctors weren't available because they were volunteering to support the Olympics. To me, I don't see how it's going to happen that the Olympics is not going to cause people who live in Tokyo and host towns to die. And if it's even just one person, it's not worth it. And that's why I signed. I would love for Tokyo to host the Olympics, but I think you just have to pull the trigger and acknowledge it doesn't, it's not appropriate. It's, it couldn't happen. It's shogunai. People have to acknowledge that. And I think forcing it through, and the knowledge that it's going to result in loss of life, is basically, when you do something negligently but it's foreseeable, that's the definition of negligence with responsibility, and particularly where that negligence involves loss of life. It's pretty crazy, and there's a lot of discussion going on. Is this just government paralyzed, unable? Nobody wants to be the person that makes the decision. The IOC has all the sponsor money riding on it and the TV rights riding on it, so they don't want to cancel it. The national government doesn't want to cancel it because of national pride. Tokyo doesn't want to cancel it because they're worried that they're going to be stuck with Tokyo taxpayers having to pay for all of the sort of lost money and so on. But no one who's actually interested in public health is actually like in a decision-making position in anything around this. And it's in that absence of somebody in an appropriate position to speak up for the people who are going to die, raising their hand, that, this is still going to happen. And it's going to happen. This is the thing. If by all logic, it should be stopped now. And the fact that it's not, and this petition shows that there are a lot of people, presumably a lot, mostly in Japan and Tokyo. The petition was only available in Japanese, but just in a few days. This has only been up for like 3 or 4 days now. And it's garnered, I think it got past 200,000 signatures within like 36 hours. So yeah, a lot of people agree with this. And yeah, butter. I saw that, Sergeant Bilko. Yeah, it's stupid. So, you know, the link is there. You can look for it online, and it's apparently change.org. It's the most participated petition in Japanese history for the site. So that's the thing that's happening. That's the second story. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and I am still on the second story. That seems to happen. Couldn't get worse, right? Mr. Cordyshep. Kang and Kodos, massive issue with my short video or replays of the stream. No one wants to watch the 3-minute commercial in 7 minutes. Please ask the editor to stop that. Can't watch a rerun lately. Are the ads that bad? Okay, I admit there is a problem here that because I pay for YouTube Premium, I do not see ads, so I'm not aware of how much they interfere. Thanks for pointing that out, Kang and Kodos. I'm gonna look. I get almost nothing off the monetization from this. I admit I'm doing the shorts partly as an experiment to see if it increases engagement, and partly to see if it actually causes me to get more than a few dollars a month on monetization, which is all that it is right now. But I agree, if the ads are longer than the video, that's not good. Let me take a look at the monetization settings and see if I can make them a little less interfering. So thanks for highlighting that. And Aaron, let's have a talk about that afterwards. So thank you for pointing that out. I agree, it's ridiculous. I think I just went and flipped all the switches, and I probably need to see it myself without premium turned on. I should go into incognito browser and see it so I can understand. So I apologize for that. It certainly isn't the intent to make them unwatchable. And so yeah, I'll look into that. Thank you, King and Kodos. Quinn Ranked, and then afterwards all the athletes are going to go home. What could go wrong? Well, exactly, right. And that's another way that it's going to cause loss of life. And again, if it just results in one case, you know, that causes long-term harm or death, then it's not worth it. Dan H, the Japanese Parliament doesn't have a government petition website. No, it does not. In UK, it does have one, and if there are 100,000 signatures, then it must be debated in Parliament or responded to. Okay, I've seen those before. My sister posted those occasionally. She lives in the UK. She's very militant about some issues. So I see those go. I didn't actually realize that was no, they definitely do not have that in Japan. And remember that based on the population, Japan has like 2.5 times the population of the UK. So I suppose the threshold should be 250,000 signatures for Japan. But no, they don't have anything like that. I mean, even a website, most websites run by the government cannot handle like 3 people looking at them sideways at the same time. So yeah. Not that much. This week you were checking vaccines in Japan LinkedIn. What you found is basically IT stuff only. So does that mean these jobs are underpaid in tendency? Yes. Well, it depends. If jobs have special skills, or if they involve rare skills or whatever. And I think temporary paying jobs are different, but certainly there is a huge swathe of underpaid IT work in Japan. So I don't know specifically what those jobs or positions we're looking for. There are good paying jobs in IT. That's what I was just saying. If you have cloud certifications or are using, anything crypto, anything AI related or whatever, you can actually get pretty good wages, as well as the fact is that if you are a really good and known IT contractor, you can pull high wages. But just like for general entry, like, hey, I've got JavaScript certification, I can build your thing. Yeah, probably better per hour stuff freelance, but then you got to have the customers in big companies. No, the pay is definitely not good, not that much less. Yeah, so anyway, those are comments. Olivia D, good to see you, and everyone. Shubhas, glad that you made it. Lucy, also good to see you in the chat. I'm going to jump into the next topic because, yes, although I said I didn't have many, we are we are not moving along. So who would have thought? We're now going into State of Emergency Part 2, the State of Emergency Strikes Back, the second episode. The original State of Emergency was supposed to go until this week, but that obviously, given that things have only gotten worse and have not gotten better, basically had no impact. All the things that went wrong with the first State of Emergency, they just wanted it to basically go over Golden Week with the hope that if people just hunkered down for 2 weeks, that somehow that could reduce the curve again. The problem being that there was no clear message to not go and plan trips for Golden Week. The Prime Minister made a statement on the first day or the day before Golden Week saying, hey, we'd like everyone not to travel for Golden Week and to plan to stay home. But they didn't say that until the day before Golden Week, when everyone had already booked all their travel, which they had booked when there was no state of emergency, but it was getting worse, but the government wasn't doing anything about it. So, all of the voluntarily, please close your restaurants early and bars early, that happened again. Although again, the idea that people don't get coronavirus drinking or eating at restaurants during the day is kind of silly. They also did this kind of prohibitionist with the data showing that people are getting coronavirus often in clusters associated with alcohol parties, which can be indoors or outdoors. They had this idea that, they're going to focus on alcohol. For example, requiring restaurants to close early if they serve alcohol, or, you can stay open longer if you don't serve alcohol. They focused on people who were, after the restaurants were closing, you had students who would just go to a convenience store and buy alcohol and drink on street corners and focusing on that. But even that, it was more almost focusing on it as a social ill than a public health issue. And again, it had a little bit of reefer madness kind of outrage about it, that it was just something that the media was going to focus on as a sort of a public ill, with the governor saying, yes, we don't want young people on street corners drinking alcohol, which is relatively common in Japan and always has been. But painting that as a coronavirus thing, they were focusing on that and not doing anything else. One of the measures that they did was this, where the government thought, rather than tell businesses to, again, increase remote working and shut down and allow people to take time off, take coronavirus vacations, they didn't want to pay for any of that. They didn't want to force companies, like they did at the start of the pandemic, to cease operations. And they certainly didn't have the money left over to pay for it. So rather than that, they thought they'd be very clever, and they would only tell the train companies to reduce the number of trains, thinking that if there are fewer trains, well, then not so many people will go to work. Of course, the problem is that if companies are not letting people take time off, because those companies are not getting compensated, of course, what happens is, when you have fewer trains, is that those trains are far more packed and crowded and nightmarish than they normally are, and far more dangerous from a coronavirus perspective. So if there, again, there are no clearly identified cases of people catching known to have caught coronavirus from trains. But of course, if you've ever been on a crowded Tokyo train, it's totally possible that if you're pressed up against someone for, 30 or 40 minutes on a train who's coughing or sick, and unfortunately that happens, it's almost unthinkable that it hasn't happened. And basically the coronavirus measures in Tokyo clearly were making that worse for what they were doing. They were either ineffectual or actually like having a negative effect like this. So yeah, that's an idea that the government finally realized was not working. And the one good thing that they have done on the new extended state of emergency to go to May 31 at the moment, to go to the end of the month, is that they are actually the government, to be clear, based on the Constitution, the central government does not have lockdown powers. They don't have powers to force people to stay at home, or to allow police to detain and question people for being, outside of curfew, or to call a curfew. And this is a legacy of the occupation of Japan after the war. During the war, of course, Japan had its own version of the Gestapo, the Kempeitai, and the central government had extreme powers over society. And, as part of the liberal order that was set up in Japan after the war to make sure that Japan could never become a fascist police state again, that basically all powers of the central government to be able to do anything like have a lockdown were taken away. It's ironic that the government's arguing that now they want those powers back to deal with, they're using the coronavirus and the lack of ability to have lockdowns as a justification to amend the Constitution. But so partly it feels a little bit like they probably could do more, but they're not doing it on purpose because they want to make an excuse to amend the Constitution to give themselves more police powers. However, that said, they are in the extended coronavirus state of emergency. While they are not forcing companies to reduce hours or to telework, they are using naming and shaming. They are going to start requesting companies submit details of what percentage and how much they're making their employees telework, because surveys are showing that although companies tried teleworking or remote working during the first and second lockdowns, the second and first states of emergency, this time they're doing it less. A lot of companies have found that they don't like it. They think that their employees are slacking off and hiding and harder to supervise, and they don't like the IT and the phone connections locations and they don't have the infrastructure for it. So a lot of companies are not doing it this time. And again, it's also contributing to the fact that the lockdowns seem to be less effective this time, as well as all the other factors, like the fact that there are the UK strains, and it seems now we have Indian strain coming into Japan as well. But right now in Tokyo, it's like 60% of the cases are the UK strain, which is more virulent than the previous strain. So on top of the fact that the strains are more harmful, they're more contagious, and they spread more easily, the government's also been doing less, and the result is that it's had no effect. So yeah, they are tightening the measures, and the one measure I commend is the increasing of the at least the reporting obligation to explain yourself as to why your company, if it hasn't done more teleworking, if it's not. And this is a good push for IT upgrades, but this whole idea of reducing the number of trains was just a disaster that backfired. I'm really glad I didn't have to commute by train, but everyone I could see talking about it was talking about how the trains are just miserable. So yes. Into the comments, Aaron, yes indeed, everybody please don't forget to like it. It really does help, and I appreciate if you do that. And of course, if you don't subscribe, please subscribe. Again, all of that helps the channel. But yes, Shubhas, ad blocker is installed in the browser, not YT. I know you didn't say that to me, I just noticed that. Yeah, I have no idea how that works. Again, I don't have to because I actually pay for premium, which is actually pretty cool. I like the downloading on mobile feature, but yes. No other comments here. I'm going to jump to the next topic. Oh yes, the big squid. So this is an interesting one. I guess you've all seen this. This has been big in the news this week, that in Noto Peninsula on the west coast of Japan, a beautiful part of Japan. I've never been to it, but I've heard wonderful things. It's a place, so I've heard of people going to work and staying there and never coming back to Tokyo. Yeah, the government has been giving a lot of taxpayer support money to these sort of towns, partly for different purposes, right? There's taxpayer funding to support the vaccination rollout, to set up facilities, to pay doctors and whatever bonuses to have the doctors work on weekends and late hours to administer vaccines. There's also money that's been given out by the government to pay, for example, when you have to have lockdowns, to pay businesses compensation for closing and so on, as well as general economic stimulus. There's been money paid for prefectures to be able to invest in, reboosting the economy that sort of suffered, for after its decline. So there's a lot of money being spent. There's a lot of different types of COVID money that's being given from the national government to different regional governments to be able to spend. For different purposes, for economic revitalization, for managing lockdowns, as well as for supporting actual medical treatment and vaccinations. So yes, to hear that the town of Noto took the $230,000, or took $230,000 of national taxpayer money and made a big squid statue with it. Superficially, and I reacted annoyed at this myself. This story came up at a time that Osaka was basically unable to, after a couple of stories I talked about the other week, how in Tokyo, because COVID is resulting in hospitals, private hospitals, being unable to take elective surgeries that are where they get most of their income for, as businesses, it's causing hospitals to suffer as businesses. And as a result, when the Tokyo Women's Medical University Hospital cut bonuses to all doctors in their hospital, 100 doctors quit en masse because they were being worked to death supporting coronavirus, and they were actually getting massive pay cuts for doing it. So you've got doctors and nurses burning out and quitting for being underpaid in Tokyo. In Osaka, you had a situation while this was happening where actually the hospitals were above 100% capacity. They were no longer able to accept patients, and there was a situation in Osaka where basically if you were over 80 years old, hospitals were just deciding not to take you anymore. And so these sort of situations which happen even outside of COVID, where hospitals in Japan are not required to accept the nearest, when you're in an ambulance, a lot of countries have systems that the nearest hospital has to accept patients, emergency patients. But in Japan, hospitals can turn them down, and particularly given that so many hospitals here are private, it's pretty common that ambulances will drive around for hours looking for hospitals that will accept emergency, like ambulance patients. This happens even in the best of times, but with COVID, and particularly the number of hospitals that don't have the ability to treat COVID patients, or that just don't want to treat COVID patients because they're worried about their bottom line, and being unable to do sort of cosmetic and elective surgeries. They've had the situation in Osaka where the beds have been full, and basically the medical system there has collapsed. And so here at the same time as the Osaka medical system is collapsing due to lack of resources and Noto is taking COVID money and spending it on a squid, I myself got pretty upset. And it's I ranted a little bit on Twitter myself that this is kind of typical of, and this overall thing is, okay, if we weren't in a desperate situation with COVID, which we definitely are in Osaka and nationwide, it's a tough, tense situation. There is an overall problem here, which this kind of just symbolizes in a way that really annoys me, which is that votes in places like Osaka and Nagoya and Tokyo, the urban centers, the densely populated areas, we have very little political representation for our population and for our tax contribution and economic output. And because most of Parliament, and this is true of a lot of countries, but it's very true of Japan, because most of Parliament are representatives who are elected from very small rural areas that have equal representation to very large areas like Tokyo. They go to the national parliament with this idea that their job is to get as much money for their hometowns as possible to boost the local economies, and this feeds into the idea that it's part of a priority for government to make sure that rural areas are not left behind from the wealth being generated by cities and to redistribute wealth. And there's some fairness to that. But at the same time, part of the reason that happens is simply because from the perspective of an urban taxpayer like myself, the rural politicians are basically looting the tax coffers from the underrepresented cities where, we need money for certain things and it's being disproportionately taken away for frivolous public works constructions. To generate jobs and win votes in rural areas that don't need it as much. And you take Noto, for example, that prefecture has far fewer COVID cases. It needs less support. You have desperate situations in the cities, yet money is being taken from the cities through the national tax coffers and is being given to them for economic stimulus, which they're which they're spending on squids. So for me, I went into a little bit of a rant how it represents the sort of money politics and the whole structure of how cities are just screwed over in Japan and taxpayers who live in cities are screwed over, and it's all basically a kind of a corrupt system to boost. And this is kind of the most perverse way where, where money could be better spent on saving lives in cities. That said, this money that was spent on this statue was specifically for economic stimulus. Noto benefits is a big squid town, obviously, and they benefit a lot from tourism, from people from places like Tokyo to go and visit them, and that's how they make a lot of money. And they've had all of that money stopped because of the pandemic. And so they were investing in creating attractions to draw attention and encourage sightseers to come back to their town when the pandemic ends. And to that end, given that tourism is kind of a vital industry for that town, also, I must say as well, I started having a chat on Twitter with someone else from New Zealand and immediately realized my own hypocrisy. New Zealand is, well, I think everywhere in the world does this, but New Zealand does this a lot, that desperately trying to attract any attention or town pride or tourism by just building a big thing. I lived near a town called Okinawan that had the biggest carrot statue in the world, or at least that's what they claim. It's only 7.8 meters high. It's not actually very high. But they have a big carrot, so every town in New Zealand has a big something. 20 minutes south was Taihape, which has a big gumboot, which they built just after I left, the gumboot capital of the world. So New Zealand up and down does stuff like this, and I must say the artisanship of the squid is actually quite impressive. And hell, I would like to go and see it and take a photo of it as a tourist attraction. Yeah, it's pretty cool. A giant squid. I would go and see that. So I was probably being I was more venting about the general state of money politics in Japan and tax waste. The squid itself is actually pretty cool, and Noto I hear is lovely, and I would like to go see there and take a photo with the squid. But it's kind of like not now giant squid. If there are people, when you have a desperate need to pay doctors to treat people who are dying and running out of hospital beds in Osaka, it does feel like money is being spent in the wrong places. So it's a bad look at a sensitive time. But that said, it is kind of cool. So I don't know what you all think, but that's what I thought about that one. Back into the comments. Does the squid have a name? Squiddy McSquid Face. That would be what I would pick. Philip R, good to see you. By the way, remember, if you want to grab my attention, hey Andrea, my boy, good night. Say my name and I will pause, just like Dan H just did. Apparently the Japanese delegation in Motegi seemed to be the least impressive during the G7 meeting. Well, that's not really new. The main things they brought up were China and helping the UK to join the CPTPP. Well, that's all something, but yes, too soon, giant squid, too soon. Yeah, that doesn't really surprise me. Japan's always been a bit of a quiet player. They do hit heavy in the background. And look, UK joining the CPTPP is not a small deal. Also, the kind of circling of the wagons on the security thing, the stuff about China is not insignificant. The likelihood of China becoming aggressive towards Taiwan and towards the Senkaku Islands and Japanese territory in the next 5 to 10 years is pretty serious. And so ensuring, alliances to back that up, to secure that is important. But yes, it is low-key stuff. So yeah, I definitely... And you're right, I don't recall anything particularly significant coming out of the meeting from a Japanese perspective. Next story. This was brilliant. I saw Giroid Reedy share this on Twitter. I don't know if he actually made this, but it's pretty good. The types of stories about Japan, the cliched stories about Japan. I thought this summed it up pretty well. I don't know if there's any that are missing. But check this out. This is wonderful. Definitely worth sharing. Hey, a lot of people are old. Yes, that story happens from time to time. 20,000 words on the fact I had to use a fax machine today. I have definitely done rants about using fax machines when I've had to use them, which I still have to do. So yes, that is a thing. Mystical tithing techniques no one actually uses. Marie Kondo jab there, which definitely that happens. Thing that was actually a story in 2012. That happens. People who take stories out of old stories from Japan and recycle them like they're new stories, like people marrying their pillows and stuff like that. That definitely, that happens. Debt and zero interest rates. What a broken financial system, published in 2006. Again, this guy's a financial reporter, so I kind of get that. But the old, yes, that the Japanese economy is broken. Eyeball licking or something. I saw it on Twitter. Yes, the latest freaky thing that I saw one example of that I will say is a trend in Japan. That definitely happens as well because there's no fact-checking on reporting on Japan. Remember these places from Lost in Translation? We hope so because it's the only movie set in Japan that we've seen. Again, that's very specific, but it sounds kind of plausible. It was a good movie, actually. I haven't seen it for years, but it's a good movie. Most of those places have probably changed now as well, but yeah. Sex robots, porn, whatever reason they're not having sex in Japan. It's not for complex. It's not complex social change until it happens in my country. Amen. Yes, I love it how Japan is like sex crazed, perverted, and sexless all at the same time, and it's somehow unique. But even though the same statistics on declining young population and birth rates all over Europe, even North America now, Japan is just ahead of the curve. But yes. You won't believe what came out of this vending machine. Yes, the underwear in vending machine, which I've never seen, never dies. That's pretty cool. They like cartoons, even though they're adults. Isn't it weird? Turn to page 9 for exclusive analysis of last night's episode of The Mandalorian. Of course, the Bad Batch currently. It's amazing. I should have talked about the Bad Batch, by the way. I didn't realize. I looked it up. So Omega, a very New Zealand way of pronouncing it. I've been away for too long. I would say Omega. Omega is voiced by an actual New Zealander. The person who voices every clone trooper in the Clone Wars and all the animated Star Wars stuff, I didn't realize was the same guy. And apparently it's a Californian guy doing a kind of a Temuera Morrison, New Zealand accent attempt. And it comes out, it's not perfect. Sometimes it sounds a bit Kiwi, sometimes it sounds a little bit Australian, sometimes it sounds a bit like, what the hell is that? But it's not bad, actually. I'm actually super impressed it's an American doing it. It doesn't sound like a Kiwi, but he varies the voices. He does every single character like in that show. It's very good. But yeah, no, proving my point. I mean, yeah, anime is kind of, I think, now a lot more mainstream than it used to be. This thing has been popular in my country for 6 months, isn't popular. The thing that has been popular in my country for 6 months isn't popular here, so backwards. Yeah, I remember so many articles about how Japan was backwards for not, thinking Facebook was a good thing, and I always maintained at the time that Japan was actually right. And I think now the world, if they actually went back and saw those stories, would agree that Japan was right. And Monster Wolf, apparently this is a specific jab at a specific story that was actually written by someone else at Bloomberg, which was specifically about a scarecrow that was actually a monster wolf. So yes, Sainted Sir, good to have you in the chat. Yeah, so these tropes, these are definitely types of news story about Japan. I think they covered it pretty well. I'm trying to think, are there any other tropes that I can think of? I think they captured most of them, so yeah. Good job on those. Back into the comments. Sleepy314, Santa Cruz, good morning to you. Steamer lane flat and foggy. Flat and foggy. Well, early morning, I mean, yeah, it's nice when you get waves early in the morning before the waves come up, actually. They're super glassy. I love that. Even when they're small, they're really nice. Man, I'd love to go to Santa Cruz one day. I am jealous of where you are. But yes, Comics Plus by Akasan. We've got Akasan in the house. Well, very good to see. Yes, this Akasan, I think I saw you sharing this one actually as well. This is just an excellent post, isn't it? No, I mean, it doesn't beat the large Cthulhu, worship idol statue there, but it's still pretty good. Good to have you in the chat, Akasan. Yes, let's push on. The head of the IOC, Bach, is supposed to come to Japan on May 17th. However, I think it was from the movie Repossessed, where it was like doing a parody of the scene from The Exorcist, where the priests come into the room and the girls there are tied to the bed and their head spins around. And it was in the parody version. I think it was Repossessed or Scary Movie, like whichever one. The priest looks at the girl and says, "Fuck this," and leaves the room. And that's pretty much what Bach has done with the Olympics. He's taken a look at Tokyo, and it looks like, yeah, he only wants to make money from the Olympics in Tokyo. He doesn't actually want to come here and get coronavirus and die, so he's cancelled his trip. I love the expression in Japanese, hijoni muzukashi. It looks really, really difficult. That's just how you say in Japanese. Saying it looks really difficult means it's completely impossible. That's what you say. Hijoni means particularly, but that's just like, even just saying kibishi, it's pretty tough. That's how you say impossible. So yes, the fact he just turned around and ran away right away. I mean, it's far. I mean, listen, sports administrators are far too fragile and important to risk in a pandemic. They should only be taking less important people like athletes and spectators. Kind of makes you crazy. But anyway, yeah, he's definitely doing the right thing. I just wonder if he's going to take everyone else with him. Hey, Tikyo, Sam, good to see you there. I will try. It's hard. I can't help it, man. When Suga announced at length in his man, he is such a bureaucrat. Just the way that he speaks is so uninspiring. He looks as exciting as he looks in that photo. When he was explaining at length what's going to happen during the next, lockdown, when he was announcing the extension of the state of emergency, he was focusing a lot on. He seems to have cottoned on to the fact. And I've seen a lot of news coverage of the UK elections, particularly the Hartlepool election, where the Tories overturned a safe Labour seat in a by-election, which is just insane for an incumbent government to overturn an opposition seat in a by-election. But one of the things being attributed to that is the relatively rapid vaccination program and the success of that in the UK. I don't know whether that's what's done it, but Suga has 4% approval ratings. He's got he's like the 6th most popular LDP prime minister at the moment, out of all the possible candidates. Even Abe is talking about coming back right now. So the other thing that he has weighing down on him is the fact that there is the government has never waited for the end of its term. They always pick the time they want a snap election, and they call an election right away. They've never let it, since 1948, they've never let it run all the way to the end of the actual term. They always decide on their own terms. But right now, the current term for national elections is September. It's not that far away. And Suga's aware of that, and he's aware that right now, as things are, he's going to get destroyed in the elections. And he's seen overseas, and he's realized that the only thing he can really do to boost himself ahead of these elections is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So while the whole vaccination thing started out there, they were saying that, we bought enough vaccines, they're all frozen and stored in warehouses. It's not our responsibility to distribute them. That's up to the prefectures. We'll give them to the prefectures, but if they are being distributed too slowly, blame the prefectures. That's literally what they said. They said, we've done our job. If you've got any complaints about not getting vaccinated yet, the fact that Japan is like the slowest vaccinating country in the developed world, even though they have far more stocks of vaccine than many other countries that are actually vaccinating more quickly. They were totally just passing the blame on to the local prefectures. However, there's been so much outrage at the slow pace of the vaccination program. Currently, they are trying to vaccinate 4.8 million medical workers and 36 million people who are vulnerable and over 65 years old. And there are about 3 million in, actually, or 2 million in at the moment, so it's not that bad, but it is going at a slow pace. They have been increasing the pace lately. Golden Week, they did stop everything. I mean, you think that would be a time that you could actually increase vaccinations, but they let doctors take their holidays. So they're up to about 350,000 shots per day at the moment, remembering that the vaccine that they're using, the Pfizer one, takes 2 shots. However, the Prime Minister has said that their goal is to get all 40 million, the 36 million elderly and 4.8 million medical workers, to get them all vaccinated by the end of July. In order to do that, they will need to vaccinate more than 1 million people per day. They've actually pledged that the full push on this is going to start from this week, with large vaccination centers to open up in Tokyo and Osaka on the week of the 26th of May. But the government's decided to stop being passive about this. They actually they sent an order. We command you, 47 prefectures, to vaccinate more quickly, which apparently pissed off all the governors immediately, because after being sort of passed the buck on this, now the government's pretending like, they're now I command you, prefectures, to vaccinate more quickly. But yeah, they're definitely piling on pressure and targets, and they are contributing resources like extra support money as well as self-defense force support. So they're using the military to help with this. All of these things other countries have been doing. They could have actually planned all of this sooner, but they're getting the message now. And I think it's no longer about getting it done before the Olympics. Right now, the target is only to get the elderly done by the time in the middle of the Olympics. But I think they are thinking beyond that to September of getting through as much of the population as possible. It would be impossible to get the whole country done, but they could probably, if they could get through like 50% of the country by September, that would probably help them. If they have a positive image about the vaccination program, it will help them in the national election. So that's what it's going to. And certainly if they could actually get 1 million shots a day done, that would be pretty impressive. 127 million people to get through, but we'll see how it goes. Theodore Sharp, are you able to vote? No, unless you live in a local government that recognizes foreign voters. I think even then you have to be a permanent resident, and there's only like 2 districts anywhere in Japan that allow voting on local elections, and it was very controversial when it came up. No, you cannot vote in Japan. You can vote as a foreigner in places like New Zealand. I don't know what it's like in America, but you can't vote in Japan, unfortunately. But yeah, good to see you in the chat there, Theodore Sharp. Travis Moore, good to see you. Still confuses you that people vote Tory. Yes, and I think my read, I don't know anything or care about the UK at all, honestly. But I mean, everybody just seems to hate everyone so much over there, particularly in the politics stuff. But my read is that the Labour there it's a global phenomenon. It's like the Democrats in America when they were in the wilderness. It's like the Democrats in Japan. It's more. It seems to me more that the opposition is in disarray. So much as that the right wing is doing a great job. But the disarray of the left wing is causing right wing parties to claim their voters. And, I think a lot of it is due to tone deafness from the left and inflexibility to recognize what their constituents actually think are important issues. So, yeah, they've been coming to terms with that. And I know that the Labour's been going through a big thing. They're sort of going back in the Tony Blair direction in the UK, which is, of course, causing huge ructions to continue inside the Labour Party. Interesting times there, but honestly, whenever I actually see English people talking anything about UK politics, it's just so venomous. It's not as bad as Australia, but it's pretty close, and arguably more right-wing than Australia, which I never thought could happen. So, yeah. By the way, I think I said this last week. I just hearing. Oh no, I won't even go into Aussie politics. That's just scary. But yeah, it's interesting times anyway. But certainly, I can definitely see how. Being seen to be good on vaccinating everybody, being good for votes. I mean, look, it worked for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, obviously. The guy was in the middle of, I think, actually criminal charges, and he got re-elected pretty much just because of the vaccine. So clearly it's something that, yes, smart politicians should be paying attention to. Akasan, yeah, your 74-year-old student with leukemia, 4 years left to live and is waiting on his shot. Got a card a few weeks ago, still waiting. That's terrible. Yeah, so obviously they've got to speed things up. Lysander 45, good to see you. Mogberry Pie, good to see you and everybody else there in the comments. I'm going to go and, wow, we are up on time. Thank you for the short videos. I will look into the ads being too annoying. Thank you for pointing that out, Kang and Kodos. Thank you for editing this, Aaron. Really appreciate it. Oh, yes. Wow, I didn't make it, did it? We were up around 11:30. I'm going to go super fast on these. I think I talked a few years ago about the Moritomo Gakuen. There was a land purchase scandal where basically when Abe was prime minister, there was some land for a very right-wing private school in Osaka that was basically sold from the government to the school, on which the wife of Prime Minister Abe was on the school board, for basically like almost free. The land was just basically given away, and it was sort of part of a. It was accused of being a part of a sort of a corrupt fraud where the accounting office agreed to fudge the land values to sort of give a free land donation for the school, and the bureaucrats who were pressured into doing the false valuation. One of them committed suicide, but he left a file where the government was saying that there were no records of how the valuation came up with the valuation. The guy who did it left a kind of a file recording all of the instructions he was given by whom to fraudulently do it as a favor for the prime minister's wife. And he killed himself, and the government denied that dossier that he created, recording everything which he had told his wife existed before he committed suicide exists. And apparently, just this week in a court trial, the government admitted, oh yeah, that file, it does exist. So now you've got the newspapers and so on, and the wife demanding that the government actually disclose. Because the government said, oh, there's no records, we can't find any proof of anything about, whether there was fraud or not. But they were hiding, literally covering up this dossier that the person who did it actually kept recording all of his notes of what happened. So now the scandals come up again of people sort of saying, hey, you got to disclose this. So that's an interesting development on that. The WHO, you heard me talking about the Olympics just before. The WHO, I mean, reminiscent of the time that TEDros came out, like just when the pandemic was starting, like back in January last year, before America even thought it was going to come to America. And Japan said, you know what, this looks like another SARS pandemic in China, so we're just going to restrict travel. And Tedros came up and said, no, WHO is definitely against taking any extreme reaction to this new pandemic in China that might harm global trade. So we think Japan should not be restricting travel links with China like it is doing. They criticized Japan for restricting flights from China when COVID-19 started. They also went and criticized and came out against masks. Masks are like the go-to move in Japan for all pandemics. And when they came out against masks, basically by that point, by like March, WHO and Tedros specifically had lost all credibility in Japan. It turns out the WHO, for some reason, felt the other day like they wanted to speak up and say that, yes, in spite of the pandemic, we are definitely in favor of Tokyo hosting the Olympics and going forward in spite of the state of emergency there. So again, why the WHO even needs to express an opinion on this, let alone one that says that they support the Olympics going ahead in the middle of a pandemic, doesn't... sponsored by Coca-Cola and Alibaba. I don't understand. And a lot of people, when I pointed this out, said that this is why America was right to cut off all the money and leave. The thing is, what the WHO does is important, right? Getting medicines and doctors to developing countries to make sure that pandemics can be managed, to make sure Ebola gets managed in Africa and not in America. What it actually does, the day-to-day boring stuff, most of what the WHO does is actually critical and important, and cutting the money there is self-defeating. But that said, why, whenever they do anything political, try to do a favor for China by criticizing Japan for taking what are recognized standard safety measures now, supporting the Olympics and stuff like that. I mean, sponsored by Coke. What is that about? So, it's just like they should not be political. And the fact that Tedros is still in charge is just crazy to me. An important organization, but they should just shut the hell up about stuff like that. I mentioned earlier about how the government's going to pressure businesses to report how much telework they're supporting. That's what that story is about. Goya, the bitter Okinawan cucumber vegetable thing that looks kind of gross, tastes extremely bitter, but is like one of the most densely antioxidant packed vegetables in the world, and that's why Okinawans, they eat that stuff and they live to be like 130. Japanese always spell it Goya, but apparently Okinawans get really annoyed and they're like, you're spelling it wrong in katakana, you should be spelling it Goya, like with a long ya as well, which doesn't really sound like any word, the way you would katakanize words in Japanese, but Okinawans insist that the way that regular Japanese people, mainland Japanese people, transcribe Goya, the Okinawan word is with a short ya on the end, is wrong. Immediately, Michaela pointed out how shikwasa, sort of a lemon-like fruit from Okinawa, that's even harder to... I don't know how you spell that actually in English, or how you romanize that. There's no standardized romanization for that as well. If you look at 10 bottles of shikwasa, they've all got different spellings on it. Yeah, Osaka apparently has a higher death rate per million people than India does right now, just for an idea of how bad, and the fact that the hospitals are no longer able to accept a lot of critical patients that require treatment. That's how bad it is in Osaka right now. Just insane that we're proceeding at the moment. The latest sort of map, we now have more than 7,000 cases per day. The deaths are also going up, 84 per day on this particular day. A lot of days now getting up near 100 deaths a day, which, you know, is not a lot by global standards, but by Japan standards, it's the worst it's ever been. Again, thanks for editing these stories from last week, Aaron, and that's all the stories. I am done. 6 minutes over. Oh, God. Quickly checking comments aimed at me. I see that we've got Lysander 45. It's not that people vote Tory, it's more that the Labour voting younger generations all live in urban areas, so they don't vote in their home regions. That kind of makes sense. Yeah, again, I have no idea. I thought it was interesting in the Hartlepool thing, and the local factors, that apparently the Labour candidate was a Remainer, even though that area voted 70% pro-Brexit. So that's another problem that the Labour Party has as well. But yeah, I can see that there's all sorts of factors in that, and, you know, but I doubt that, you know, certainly vaccinations, you would think, if they're doing a good job on it, and certainly I know that my sister and my brother-in-law are getting shots ahead of me, so it looks like, you know, they're doing okay at that in the UK, so that would be some sort of a factor. But yes, you're right, UK, I will not go anywhere into UK politics. So yeah, Quinn Rankett, hey, you can't call other countries' politics venomous and leave out the USA. Well, USA is just completely broken, and it's kind of like a rule I have here not to talk about US politics, although of course I break it now and again. Steve from Berkeley, thank you, great episode. Thank you for saying it's a great episode. I really do appreciate it, and if you did appreciate it, please definitely put a like on the video, because it does help, and I do appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and see you next week. I will see about the annoying ads. I will see what we can do about. I still want to try monetizing them, but I definitely don't want it to hurt the videos, so I will look at turning those down. Thank you for the feedback on that. Have a good week. Stay safe. Get your vaccinations. Get your shots. I'm going to get mine as soon as I can. Yeah, my dad got his in New Zealand the other day. Oh, which is, for a time, it actually looked like that satellite, the space junk was actually going to crash on my dad's house. It was literally heading for Northland in New Zealand, where my dad lives. I was kind of like, I was looking at the map, and I heard it was going to crash near New Zealand. I was looking at the world map, and I was like, wait a minute. And the closer I looked, it was actually like literally over my dad's house, which is kind of freaky. It crashed in the Indian Ocean. I could talk about that, but I'm not going to talk more about that today. But yes, interesting times. Remember, if you can follow me on Twitter, stay safe, get your shots. My dad's got a shot. My mum's getting a shot soon. I'd love to get my shot. Stay safe. Have a good week, and see you later. Boom. Peace. Good to see you, Akasan. Good to have you here in the chat. And everybody else, have a good week. End.